You're listening to Transition Middle East, decoding the Gulf's economic future, from oil to knowledge, from tradition to technology. Hello and welcome to Transition Middle East. My name is Omar Nasser, speaking to you from Dubai, a city built at the intersection of trade, capital and energy flows. As an economist focused on Gulf transformation and global energy markets, I look at geography not as a map, but as an economic force. Tonight, we turn to one of the most strategically sensitive corridors on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow maritime passage whose stability directly influences global inflation, financial markets and geopolitical balance. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. On its northern coastline lies Iran. On the southern side, Oman's Musandam Peninsula and the United Arab Emirates. At its narrowest point, the strait measures roughly 33 to 40 kilometers. Yet the actual shipping lanes are far tighter, just over 3 kilometers wide in each direction, separated by a buffer zone. These lanes are deep enough for the largest crude carriers in the world, the very large crude carriers, to pass fully loaded. From here in Dubai, every tanker departing Jebel Ali or Fujairah toward the Gulf must navigate this corridor. It is not merely a body of water, it is the exit valve of the global energy system. Let's look at what the data tells us. On average, between 20 and 21 million barrels of oil transit the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That equals approximately 20% of global oil consumption and close to 30% of all seaborne oil trade. In addition, roughly 20% of global LNG volumes pass through this same narrow route, primarily exports from Qatar, the UAE, and, to a smaller extent, Iran. In financial terms, the annual value of energy flows through Hormuz is estimated between 500 and 600 billion US dollars. Saudi Arabia alone accounts for around 5.5 million barrels per day moving through the corridor. Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar and Iran follow. For Qatar's LNG exports in particular, there is no maritime alternative. Every cargo bound for Asia must cross this passage. However, the dependence is not evenly distributed across the globe. Around 82 to 84% of crude oil and more than 80% of LNG exports transiting Hormuz are destined for Asian markets. China, India, Japan and South Korea together absorb nearly 70% of these flows. For India, a significant share of crude imports depends on this corridor. China remains the primary buyer of Iranian oil exports. Europe and North America are less physically reliant on these shipments, yet they are deeply exposed through price mechanisms. Oil is globally priced. Even a regional disruption translates immediately into higher benchmark prices in London and New York. From Dubai's perspective, this makes Hormuz less a regional issue and more a global pricing lever. The question often raised is whether alternatives exist. There are partial bypass routes. Saudi Arabia operates the east-west petroline to the Red Sea with capacity near 5 million barrels per day. The UAE's Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline to Fujairah can transport approximately 1.5 to 1.8 million barrels daily, allowing some exports to avoid the Gulf entirely. Combined, alternative pipelines may redirect roughly 3.5 to 4 million barrels per day under optimal conditions. Yet when daily flows through Hormuz exceed 20 million barrels, the gap becomes evident. Pipelines cannot replace the corridor in the event of full closure. They can only mitigate part of the shock. This structural imbalance explains why even verbal threats move markets. Historically, the Strait of Hormuz has faced repeated crises. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the so-called tanker war saw more than 400 commercial vessels attacked, the majority oil tankers. Insurance premiums soared. The United States intervened with naval escorts under Operation Earnest Will. Despite missile strikes, naval mines and international confrontation, the strait was never fully closed. Oil continued to flow because both Tehran and Baghdad depended on export revenues. In 2019, renewed tensions following the US withdrawal from the nuclear agreement led to tanker attacks near Fujairah and in the Gulf of Oman. Markets reacted immediately, with oil prices rising several percentage points within days and war risk insurance premiums escalating sharply. Yet again, no sustained blockade occurred. The pattern is consistent. Disruption creates volatility, but full closure has historically been avoided. The period between 2024 and 2026 has again elevated Hormuz to the center of global attention. Escalating tensions between Iran, Israel, and the United States, including direct strikes and retaliatory threats, intensified rhetoric around possible closure. Iran's parliament symbolically supported measures enabling such action under extreme circumstances, and naval signaling during peak tensions caused temporary shipping hesitations. Each escalation triggered immediate reactions in Brent crude prices. Even limited confrontations generated multi-dollar price movements within a single trading session. This illustrates the true power of the Strait. It is not only a physical choke point, but a psychological multiplier embedded in energy futures markets. From a military perspective, Iran possesses asymmetric capabilities: naval mines, fast attack craft, anti-ship missiles along its coastline. Analysts estimate thousands of deployable sea mines. Technically, temporary disruption is feasible. Strategically, however, a prolonged closure would damage Iran's own export revenues, primarily destined for China. It would also likely provoke coordinated international naval response. Economically, a full shutdown removing 20% of global oil supply could push prices toward $120 to $150 per barrel in extended scenarios. The consequences would be immediate: higher fuel costs, renewed inflationary pressure, tighter monetary policy, and potential recessionary effects in energy importing economies. From Dubai's vantage point, the Strait of Hormuz represents both vulnerability and leverage. The Gulf states are acutely aware of their geographic position. This awareness explains why the UAE has invested heavily in Fujairah as an export terminal outside the Gulf, why Saudi Arabia continues expanding Red Sea infrastructure, and why sovereign wealth funds are diversifying aggressively into technology, renewables, and global logistics. Behind every energy transition lies an economic opportunity. Reducing choke point exposure is not only a security strategy, it is an economic modernization strategy. The broader lesson is structural. Globalization has optimized efficiency, but not redundancy. A maritime corridor less than 40 kilometers wide carries 1/5 of the world's oil supply. Financial markets, insurance systems, and industrial supply chains respond instantly to developments in this narrow waterway. Hormuz is therefore not merely a regional flashpoint. It is a barometer of global risk sentiment. The Middle East is no longer just exporting energy. It is exporting stability strategies, infrastructure investments, and diversification models designed to manage precisely these risks. Yet, as long as hydrocarbons remain central to the global economy, the Strait of Hormuz will remain one of its most sensitive pressure points. From here in Dubai, watching the steady rhythm of tankers on the horizon, one understands that trade depends on confidence, and confidence depends on stability. This is why the Strait of Hormuz matters, economically, strategically, and systemically. It is a narrow channel with global consequences. Thank you for listening to Transition Middle East. I am Omar Nasser. Until next time, let the data guide your understanding of our region and its role in the world economy. Thank you for listening to Transition Middle East. You'll find more details, data links, and sources for today's episode in the show notes below. I am Omar Nasser, your virtual information influencer from Dubai. This voice you're hearing is AI-generated, designed to convey data-driven clarity and authentic regional insight from the heart of the Gulf. My mission is simple: to explain how the Middle East is transforming, from energy exporters to innovation economies, and to build understanding through facts, not speculation. And if you're interested in producing a podcast like this, with professional scripting, AI voice design, and data-based storytelling, feel free to reach out. Let's create intelligent audio that informs, inspires, and connects. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and keep your focus on the future.